You're listening to WPPM LP 106.5 FM in Philadelphia, and you're listening to the Found in Translation radio show and podcast, the home for, of course, stacking truth on today's politics and today's hottest deadlines. I'm your co-host of the mostest, like Ray likes to say, the Lioness of Lebanon. That stuck with me, Ray. I loved that one. And of course, here with the super producer,
hey,
Samantha.
What's up?
So Samantha's joining me. Ray's over the phone, so he'll be also included in this super important conversation. So what's going on, Ray? What's going on with public transportation today? How's it treating you?
Let me set the stage for my people. Good evening. You know, duty called. I had to go to Washington, D.C. today to do the work that we do. And, of course, I was just miles away when the Amtrak got stuck. So I had a major delay. I should have been in the studio. You know, I'm pretty punctual, despite my heritage. But I will. We're still doing the show. The lead chair is in great hands with Yaya, Rivera, and I will be in studio moments from now as my Uber pulls up as we speak. So let's get this party started.
Let's get it
started.
And by the way,
I think we need to call Samantha. I'm going to start calling her Luka Doncic because she's the rookie of the year.
Right? Yeah, because she was like, I'm like, so Samantha, let's do this. Yes, we're just going to crush it. We're going to bring it up here. So, you know, so I want to get right into it, right? Because we have so many things to cover today, and I want to be sure that we take care of everything. For those of you, you know, tuning in on Facebook Live, I know that you can't really hear Ray at the present moment, but, you know, the audio will be available, you know, anywhere you can find podcasts, you know, iTunes, Spotify, and, you know, Ray and I and Samantha were all pretty punctual on posting it on social media, so make sure that you keep your eye out for that. So Ray and Samantha, as we know, there is a ridiculous crisis right now happening in the United States at the border on so many levels. The argument over, you know, the word concentration camps and how, you know, those of us who are brothers and sisters within the Latinx community are being treated from everything that happens. Of course, you know, I want to do like a quick moment of silence and, you know, a real recognition to, you know, Oscar Alberto and Valeria Martinez Ramirez, you know, the imagery of, you know, of their lifeless bodies face down in the Rio Grande, you know, which is, you know, quite devastating. For those of you who follow me on social media, you know that I've taken a little bit of a hiatus from social media and kind of taken a mental break. So, you know, during my short-lived break to see that type of footage, it truly is heartbreaking. So Samantha, like when you saw how that footage was pretty much plastered everywhere, not really taking into consideration the amount of trauma that causes, you know, what was your first like thought when you saw that imagery?
Honestly, it was just stunning because it's one thing to talk about it. It's one thing to hear about it in the news or just everything. But the fact that they had the footage just out there to see, it's almost, to me, it's almost disrespectful. Like there are people who lost their lives because of something so careless and unfortunate. So I just feel like they should have been more respectful to present them and at least give them the I don't even know, just they should have respected their bodies and just everything. They shouldn't have showed it the way they did, and they should have, I guess, just helped them, and they shouldn't have even been in that situation in the first place. So
yes, for sure. And Ray, did you want to add anything to that? Like, how did you feel the moment, you know, that you saw that happening? So we'll you know, we'll go back to Ray. I don't think he's coming in right now in regards to how he felt about the photograph. But, you know, I think the one thing we have to acknowledge is, you know, Samantha, you hit it on the head. This is easily avoidable, right? You know, people who come to the United States, humans, I feel like too often we dehumanize immigrants.
Yes.
I mean, they breathe the same air that we breathe.
They're people. They're human. They're us.
They're human.
They're just from a different country.
They're, you know, they look different. They have a different complexion. They speak different languages. They follow different religions. So I feel that, you know, there's like, again, they're like they dehumanize these people, which is very sad to me because at the end of the day, I know that, you know, Puerto Ricans and Dominicans and Cubans, we always kind of like come at each other's necks, like jokingly, well, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm this. But I mean, in reality, what's happening, those are our brothers and sisters. Those are people who identify as the Latinx community. And that's the community in which we're in as humans. So I feel like it hits too close to home on so many levels. Yeah. And I think that the one thing I think that is really important is, you know, at a certain point, you know, I think that we should stop denying it, right?
Yeah, stop denying it, stop avoiding it, and pretending like it's not happening. Because at the end of the day, I mean, it's that they think in any right mind that this is okay because it's a part of some little clause in one of the documents somewhere that it's okay to do, and it's not.
Well, it's not. And when I read articles of the living conditions where, there's professionals stating that it's worse than like a torture scene, that there's open space, that young girls who are not fully matured are taking on the responsibility of taking care of children that don't belong to them. The lack of resources to water, the lack of resources to using the restroom, the fact that there isn't any more playtimes for the children and no way for them to get any type of education, not getting proper medical attention when they when they need it. It's like, okay, so let me go through this process. So they're coming to the United States seeking asylum, which is not illegal. Hello, hey Ray, I hear you.
Ray?
Hello,
Yes,
I hear you,
yes,
Ray.
we
Yep,
hear you.
you're here.
Okay, sorry, I'm getting in the Uber now. Continue.
That's okay. And again, this is Yaya Rivera talking. And the one thing I just don't understand is, like, let me try to run through this process, right?
Okay.
Like, they come to the United States, they try to seek an
Yep.
asylum. In some instances, it could be anything. It could be, reuniting with family that they have here, which is also legal. It could be education. It could be, there's so many things. And so when people say, quote unquote, do it the right way, it's like, okay, do you ever have time to really think in a moment of crisis? Like, no, you just act.
You just act. You do.
You just act. You do the absolute best you can for your family. Then you come here. Your families are being completely torn apart. Children and families, in some instances, never going to be reunited. Some children being put into foster care or systems in which they can become adopted. And then, neglect and these other things that are happening where people are passing away in these camps and there's no answers. There's absolutely no answers to what's happening to them. Samantha, do you have any other statements in regards to what's happening in the border?
Honestly, I'm just really baffled that it's gone on this long and that they haven't put a stop to it. I just couldn't, I can't imagine that happening. Like, I don't have kids personally, but I have a little brother and sister. So to even think about one of them going through something like that or being separated from me, my mom, my brother, it's wild because there's no reason for it. They are doing things the right way, and all they're doing is seeking asylum. So at the end of the day, they're not wrong. They're not criminals. They're just people looking for help.
Absolutely.
And it's the United States. We're made of immigrants, so it's like we shouldn't be turning them down. We're supposed to lend a helping hand. We're supposed to be there, and the fact that we're just turning them away and then just sending them into camps, it's ridiculous.
And I think that, like, the one thing that's most challenging is the terminology used to describe these immigrants. There's so much xenophobia and hatred in certain media outlets, especially from the president, just like rapists and criminals and this and that. It's like,
and that they're making the country worse. How?
Well, that's not even economically correct. So we're not even going to get into that. But it's just, crazy. Like, Ray, did you want to add anything about the...
Yes, yes, no, I did. And, we've talked about this pretty extensively on the show. I'm not happy about it, but I am proud in the sense that we're literally one of the first media outlets that sounded the alarm pre-2018 when Trump was elected, and we predicted that we were going to go down this road. And, and we're going to talk a little bit about my Facebook in a second about my Facebook post that really resonated with my friends and family and many of our Found in Translation listeners. But that we're torturing children, and we can, let's stop with the nonsense about arguing the semantics of it. As someone noted on social media recently, Anne Frank, the most celebrated victim in the history of the Holocaust, did not die in a gas chamber. She died basically in the same conditions that these Latino kids are in now, basically being slowly tortured by not being cared for and dying of illness. And so this is the country that we're living in. This is the moment of history. And the angle of which, and again, there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of, we don't treat prisoners of war this way. So the argument around the treatment and the politics of it is almost secondary to the human crisis. The angle I wanted to share on this segment of the show with our audience is really to share a fellowship in this moment for the people listening to this and watching this. Because, and I'd like you to, Yashira, sort of begin reading portions of the post I made, is I think it really sums up how many of us are feeling right now. And the biggest thing I wanted to get us to get out of this is that if we're feeling guilt, if we're feeling stress, if we're feeling hopelessness, those are very legitimate emotions. the question is, how are we going to support each other through this process? And most importantly, how are we going to support these children so we can do everything we can to get them out of the situation? So, Yashira, if you wouldn't mind, if you can begin sort of the first passage of my post, and then the three of us in our audience can have a conversation about sort of how that relates to how many of us are feeling right now.
Yeah, and thank you, Ray, for saying that. I do want to say that I did add a couple things to your post as well. It's like, stop denying it, stop avoiding it, and stop pretending like it's not happening, because guess what? We all know about it. We know it's happening. Do something. Keep telling them, you know? And the other part was, I can't believe I have to write this post. This is an issue of morality and humanity and not politics. That's the part that I added, because it's like, we continue to keep making this an issue of politics, which it is, and there's ways to fix it with politics. But it's like, why do we have to explain to people that a human life is important, especially one of a child, right? And, you know...
And let's talk about that for a second, because, and it was, you know, one of the things that I think resonated with the people that responded to that post, one of the most shared personal posts I've ever had, if not the most shared, was that there's many of us, particularly in the Latino community, particularly among just activists, humanitarians, people, la buena gente de nosotros, of all faiths, of all backgrounds that we're friends and family with. And I believe on some level, if not the majority, a big chunk of this country is feeling a tremendous amount of guilt, especially our Latinas, especially people, leaders in the Hispanic community, that, wow, you know, I have to go to work, I have to live my life. And regardless of the good things I'm doing day to day to take care of my family, take care of my community, I feel, and many of us feel, a tremendous guilt we're not doing enough. And so I think that we have to sort of on some level acknowledge that and let people know it's okay. You know, we have to get rest, and we have to, you know, we have to take care of our families. And yeah, on some level, should we all drop everything we're doing and get in front of the detention facilities? Maybe. But I just wanted to share that this is causing a tremendous amount of stress in our community, that even beyond the major suffering which these kids are going through, that we're all suffering. And I wanted to get your thoughts, Yashira and Samantha, about around the stress this is calling, maybe if you don't mind sharing personally, and or any other emotions you're feeling, because this is hitting all of us tremendously. And I just think that we need a moment to talk about that.
Yeah, no, I completely understand, because, and Ray, well said. So for those of you listening, that was Ray Collazo, of course, the hostess of the Moses. And we're here live from PhillyCAM, or actually not live on Facebook Live, but audio, at WPPM LP 106.5
We're always
FM.
live, girl.
And the one thing I want to say about how I feel, and, you know, this is going to be hard for me to even say, because I always try to keep part of myself personal, but I've actually decided to take time off from activism and take time off from being fully embedded in politics and what's happening, because I do feel an overwhelming sense of sadness and helplessness, right? Yeah. Because, you know, through my work in radio, through WURD for the past 2 years, through my work through reproductive justice and running groups, through everything I do, through volunteerism and activism, I'm front lines, right? You have to see the harsh realities of tent cities and the opioid crisis, and you sitting in a room with, you know, Tamir Rice's mother and Cedra Bland's mother discussing the police brutality their now dead children face. I mean, it really is a mental toll, right? Yeah. So me personally, I'm making it a point to live a healthier life with self-care. And part of that self-care is, you know, being very conscious about how to protect my soul. Because when I see that image of those two bodies floating in the Rio Grande, like, I began to cry. I sat there on my porch, and I'm getting choked up now, because... I'm sitting on my porch, living a lavish life compared to these humans may not even ever be able to experience, right? I'm drinking, you know, La Colombe coffee. I own my house with my husband. You know, I do so many things. And it's like those people will never have that opportunity because of the color of their skin, the language that they speak, and the country in which they come from. They're not good enough. They're being told on so many levels. So it's been traumatic, and it's been devastating. It's been saddening. It's been, you know, it's been so overwhelming, because how can we let this happen? Like, how? And I beat my head against the wall. I volunteer for organizations, creating funds for immigrants and finding ways to help. And I feel that at a certain point, I was leading myself last. Like, at the end of every day, I would get home and I was just cry or be stressed or upset. And I realized that I was focusing so much on trying to help everybody else and putting myself last, which explains, why my body has been haywire. But, and this isn't an indefinite break. Unfortunately, there's enough injustice in the world that I'll come back stronger than ever. And I need to save all my energy for the election, right? You already know. So, Samantha, how about you?
For me, like you said, I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed that it's gotten to this point. I'm overwhelmed that people that very well could have easily been me or you are facing such turmoil. And it's just, to me, the biggest word that I can think of is just I'm disgusted. I'm disgusted that they had to go through that. I'm disgusted that people can't just come into this country. Like, I'm baffled. I just have no words at how people are going through all this, and there's no reason for it, especially when all they're trying to do is make a better life for themselves.
So now we're going to take a break and kind of switch things up. So you are listening to WPPM LP 106.5 FM Philadelphia and the Found in Translation podcast. We are taking a break. We'll be back on the flip side. You are listening to the Found in Translation radio show on WPPM LP 106.5 FM in the city of brotherly love, and Found in Translation podcast. Listen to 106.5 FM in Philly at PhillyCAM.org. Listen in on the TuneIn app, and you can download Found in Translation on the Raised Latino Talk podcast feed on iTunes and anywhere you can download a podcast. And most importantly, you can register to follow and subscribe the podcast, like me, on iTunes, so every time that Ray does something, I get it immediately on my phone.
That's right. Anywhere you can download a podcast. We have friends that listen to us strictly on Pandora, strictly on Spotify, Stitcher. Yeah. And we can download a podcast. And our reach is expanding. We're on iHeartRadio now. We're getting on radio.com.
Getting there.
So no excuse to listen to a podcast. And as you all have seen, we're doing more video. So you can get us on every platform.
Yes, you can. So in the last segment, for those of you who are tuning in online and listening, of course, to the podcast, we were talking about the crisis at the border and about the unfortunate footage of the gentleman and his young daughter who passed away trying to cross the Rio Grande. So this segment, I think, is really important that we discuss mental health because this is trauma, right? Like, so many of us in the Latinx community already face trauma and violence in our homes, right? Like, we all already have our own things that we have to deal with that are traumatic. Now what do we do and say to our peers, right? And what do we say to each other, and how do we support each other through this mental health, almost like a crisis, because, the suicide rate is the highest it's ever been, especially for millennials. Young black and brown boys are actually the highest right now with suicide. So, like, what are we doing? Like, what conversations are we having, and how can we have a really intimate conversation about mental health, right?
Well, I think that this is a subject that cuts all parts of our community, right? So, obviously, the trauma that these young people are going through, kind of cannot be matched on some level. Yeah. But similarly, in North Philly, Camden, thinking about some of these communities, West Philly, some of these communities that are part of the PhillyCAM universe, specifically, but really any kind of most of the inner city communities that we sort of represent in the work that we do with our leadership community, is that there's kids going through PTSD and trauma every day, trying to get to school, witnessing violence, whether it's domestic violence, school shootings. And so what's happened is that this is sort of a precursor or sort of the end result of what's happened with these children on the border. Because when I was a baby, when I was a small kid, and even really before that, in the 70s and 80s, when drugs started proliferating in our community, our argument, and our people were already dying of cocaine and getting heroin and these other scourges, is that the argument was, well, hey, our people are like suffering and dying, and well, it's only Latinos and blacks, it's only poor people. whatever. Well, and then our solution is to lock these people up, not some of the things you just talked about. Fast forward to this generation, what is arguably the biggest issue in the country? Basically, white people going through the same thing. And so when you don't humanize anyone, you don't humanize anybody. Everyone. You don't humanize everyone. So we have to take a step back to acknowledge is we wouldn't have gotten to this point if we hadn't cared about blacks and Latinos and the poorest people in our society to begin with. And now, in my community, South Jersey, the uppitiest high school is considered the biggest heroin center in the area. So let's start there with how we treat people and the compassion we have for other people and understanding these are health problems. That being said, dealing with our mental health, and Yashira, you've shown a lot of leadership in this area, is incredibly important. And whether it's spirituality, mindfulness, clinical, we've got to support each other, and we have to take this stigma away from needing the help, because that's what happens a lot when our community is taboo to ask for help. You're supposed to be self-sufficient, you're supposed to be independent, you're not supposed to have got caught up in something stupid like doing drugs, blah, 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 right? So how do we, Yashira, my question to you is, how do we get over the stigma of understanding and being open to the idea that there's nothing wrong with seeking help?
So that was beautiful, Ray. I just want to say that.
Mama taught me well. What can I say?
My biggest issue with or complexity with stigma is that we do it to ourselves in the Latinx community, right? Yeah. We always tell ourselves when a friend or family member says, "Oh, we need psychological help," they're like, "Oh, tú estás loca, ¿qué está pasando? Tú estás bien, eso no te va a ayudar, vete para iglesia," right? Like that's what I was told and what I heard as a kid. It's like, you're gonna be fine.
You're going to be fine.
You're going to be fine. Go to church.
Yep.
Go to church.
And pray, and it's going to all be prayed away, right? How we stop the stigma, and I've been talking about this in a lot of my groups, is talking about it more, right? Mm-hmm. Being transparent about your own stories and whether or not you seek mental help. I seek a therapist. I started 6 months ago. That one phone call just to set the appointment took me 3 years of just me just hounding myself, thinking that I was losing it, that I wasn't good enough, that, my fiance would leave me, like my parents would judge me. Like I went through this whole roller coaster of, I'm not good enough and I need help, right? No, it's because I had trauma as a child. I had to live through a lot of unfortunate things. I have multiple disorders. And when I'm down, I'm really down. And me talking to a counselor about it to try to seek holistic measures to help me cope with my stress, to reduce my, inflammatory illnesses, doesn't make me any different of a person. I'm still the same person. It doesn't make me any lesser of a human. And when people tell me I'm really struggling with that appointment, I offer to drive them to their appointment. Mm-hmm. I offer to make the phone call for them. I try to find establishments that have a scaled type of service where it's based off of your income and not based off of whether or not you have insurance.
And there's a big gender element to this.
Yeah, toxic masculinity.
Well, yes, but the part I was referring to is this idea that, particularly in the Latino communities, that the stereotype is that, well, if there's something wrong with her, ella loca, it's thrown off as that she's just crazy in some metaphorical, whatever that means, and there isn't an acknowledgement to well, the person just maybe needs some help, and how do we help them? It's mental health's not considered an option, and we have to get around that. Oh, Yaya, what have you found when talking to people has given them the strength to just understand it's okay?
It's been crazy. So the first time I was open about seeking therapeutic help, which I was in denial myself, legit denial. And I want to make it clear, the first 2 appointments I scheduled with the therapist, I also canceled in the parking lot while I was already there. So this was a crisis for me. Yeah. It was really hard to talk to myself about it. So yeah. Just try to find the research to see what places you can go to underneath your health insurance and try to seek research. That was the one feedback I've gotten, being transparent that it's a lot easier than you think to get help, right? Yeah. It's just a matter of convincing yourself. And the other thing, the one thing I lost track of was, ever since I've been really transparent about my mental health journey, especially on social media, especially at speaking engagement, people inbox me. Yeah. This young woman inboxed me how, she feels more inclined to see her therapist and don't feel bad about herself. And, you know, because she was inspired that I said in a room in front of 300 people that I see and that I seek a therapist. And, you know, I ran into a lot of the young girls that were at that event, at other events. They're like, you know, I made my appointment for my therapist. Thank you. And it's like just to see like these heartfelt messages of people that don't even personally know me or know my battles, and I don't know theirs, send me, you know, paragraphs of being thankful that I was open about it. Like, I mean, what more can I do, right?
Yeah,
like
it's almost like a domino effect. Like one person starts it, one person says something, and then everybody else kind of falls in line because that person genuinely had the bravery, they had the ability to speak up and say like, yeah, I need help. And that's the biggest thing. Like, people are afraid to admit and to say like, yeah, I have a problem. But I feel like it's because people shame it so much. And I feel like if we removed like the shame element of it, people would talk about it easier. People would be willing to seek help. They'd be willing to ask for help. Like, hey, they wouldn't just say it to Yaya. They would say it to Ray. They would say it to me. They would speak to more people about it because it's not something that's a big deal. Everybody needs help. You know what I mean?
Look, I mean, we had with that Facebook post we talked about in the first segment, that was an example of that dynamic, because what happened was, I think the reason it resonated, I mean, everyone knows this thing is effed up, and everyone knows it's horrible, and everyone at some level is kind of trying to deal with it. But the fact that, in a very small way, I showed vulnerability, saying, I feel guilty about this, and I don't, on some level, quite know how to deal with it. That's what I was saying, right? Like, you know, do I drop my life to go to the southern border? Do I, short of that, what could I be doing more? And this sense of guilt and hopelessness. And I think because others are feeling that way, they started to share. And if you saw like Grace Bonilla and some other friends.
Yeah, that was a really powerful post.
Very powerful. And let me tell you, Grace Bonilla is one of the most powerful women in New York City. Grace Bonilla runs the Human Welfare Department for the city of New York. Yeah. She's one of Mayor de Blasio's top leaders. I mean, she's probably one of the most top 10 powerful people in New York City government. So, you know, she runs $1 billion budget. So if she's feeling that way, can you imagine all of us, right? So I think that it goes back to the thing I wanted to kind of, from my perspective, get this conversation is I just want people to understand that leadership matters. And you may think, just thinking about Christina Vega, and we're going to promote her event in a second, but just thinking about Christina, that you know, her one voice led to all these women and all these people relieving themselves of this burden of this shame that they felt and sharing. And then it snowballs. Oh, they feel that way? Oh, then I don't feel alone. Yeah. I don't feel alone.
Because that's the feeling you feel when you're facing sadness and depression, right? Like what you feel is that you can have the best support system in the world, you can have a very decent life, but when you're in the moments of pure sadness and depression, like there's no sunshine. Like I don't know how else to say it. Like there's no sunshine. There isn't. There's nothing besides a deep feeling in the pit of your stomach and a huge sense of worthlessness. Like that you're replaceable in this universe. And so like, Ray, the one thing I do want to say, that there's a ton of resources out there. I do want to give people solutions. So the 24-hour suicide crisis and intervention call line, right? I know, like, suicide is a very hard thing to discuss. I think it's really happening more often recent, especially in the Black and brown communities. And not only are you facing traumas personally, you're also facing traumas by watching the news, right? Like, you're told constantly how insignificant you are.
You're seeing a lot of trauma on YouTube. These young people, there's so much. I mean, it's a lot of fun and mostly good stuff, but we have to be, especially with these kids, we have to be super, super vigilant. Yeah. And we have to communicate with them because the thing is, they know more than we did. Yeah. And that's a blessing and a curse. Yeah.
And so I just want you all to know that who are listening and who are looking on social media, like, your life is worth it, right? Like, we want to be sure that you're taking care of yourself, that you're seeking the mental health that you deserve, because you deserve it, just like going to the gym and eating healthy and everything. Just think of your brain as abs. You want abs. So you got to work out and make it happen. But the 24-hour suicide crisis and intervention call center is 24 hours. So if you know of a friend or family member or yourself that's not feeling it and they seem like they're suicidal, if they say trigger words, like, you know, I don't want to live anymore, like they blatantly tell you they're going to kill themselves.
They withdraw. Because some people go the opposite. They withdraw. They used to be social. They used to hang out. Now they don't want to deal with you. They don't want to talk to you. Yeah, they're not responding.
Yeah, and if you're not sure, you know, look online and there's like these great great resources that we're about to give you. They'll give you a list of people you feel need mental health. But the Suicide Crisis Intervention Call Center is 215-686-4420. And that's based out of an organization here in Philadelphia. We have Esperanza Health Center, which helps with behavioral mental health. There's esperanzahealth.com, so ESPERANZA health.com. The one thing I do want to stress, I know that it's very hard depending on your pay grade to whether or not you can have a primary physician. But let's say as a woman, if you go to your yearly exam even at a Planned Parenthood and you're saying, hey, I'm feeling a little under the weather, like they will give you resources that you need. Your family doctor, if you have one, tell them, you know what, I don't feel right. Help me, and they will. The Light program, which is here in Philly, they're located all over the place. That's actually the organization that I attend because they work really great with your work schedule, and they're all over the city. It's the Light program, so the lightprogram.pyramid, so PYRAMID healthcarepa.com. There's Healthy Minds Philly, Philadelphia Mental Health Center. So if you Google Mental Health Philadelphia, there is plenty of resources and pay grade and I forget what it's called, where they change it based off of your income. I think it's scale, like a scale program. I may be wrong, so don't quote me on that part. But we have to remember that, the end of stigma is to call BS on the stigma, say that it's not cool. It doesn't make you stronger to say that you're perfect. And, especially with these lives on social media, with there's so much materialism and so much fakeness, people tend to mix that up with reality. And, it's really important that if you need help, just ask for it. And I'll be sure to have these resources on my social media tonight.
Yeah, and we'll definitely share those links. And one of the things I wanted to share, thinking about our great conversation, was it last week? 2 weeks ago with Edwin Desamore, kind of our Father's Day edition, talking about how do we support our young men in our community, is that, we got a lot of young brothers out here returning home from incarceration, dealing with the PTSD, the stress of the street violence and seeing it, maybe being a part of it or close to it, having lost a homie or a brother or a sister or a family member to this the street violence, and just dealing with a whole lot of stress about some of the things they've seen. Maybe they were in the military. And they're coming back from men and women. Of course, in our community, we're the ones that go fight these stupid wars. So, we got a lot of homies that come back, and they're not the same. We know that. And how do we reach out? How do we help? We know something's wrong, so I think we need to attend. I think about the leadership of Christina and thinking about, if we know something's wrong, if we know we need to take a step, and then whether to help these young people on the border, another cause that you're involved in, or dealing with a person or a loved one, is that, you need to take a step. One of the things I wrote in the post is do something today, do something tomorrow. There's only so much time in the day. You're only going to be able to do so much. So you have to relieve the stress of this is not people's evil is not your responsibility. But I think if we all do our part, and that was the other beautiful thing that came out that post is, Beatriz Caraballo from Camden, it's like, I want to go to a protest. Where's a protest? And Michelle Violet Tiger was like, oh, there's this event July 12th. And then they're sharing resources. People are sharing ideas. And so it is about that. How do we do our part? We just got to take a step. I mean, did I initially do this to help people? Maybe, when I started my house interviewing my friends over the phone with bad audio. But something told me to do it. And guess what? I would have never met y'all, and we would have never had this platform to promote what Christina's doing. And there's a domino. So if your heart's telling you something, don't ignore it. I'm not saying don't take some level of responsibility of what's going on, but just take a step.
That's right. Because
this is about leadership. We got in this position. We can get into all the theatrics of it about really, really horrible leadership. And we can argue why and everything else. But that's really what it's about, right? So we have to combat it with our leadership, with our faith, with our values. And so we've seen too many examples. Look, we haven't even gotten to some of the good news, principally things like Tiffany Cabana, 31-year-old LGBT Puerto Rican young woman, the public defendant, wins the district attorney race in Queens Tuesday. It would be, if Queens was its own city, be the 5th biggest city in America. 31-year-old Puerto Rican went to Penn State. You probably know people that know her.
Yeah.
And that's just one small political example. We got a whole lot of power in our community. We just need to understand. Let's not be scared to use it. Look at my Yumbo. We talk about the political stuff, and I'll be on with Elba Garcia after the part 2 of the debates later tonight online. Julian Castro, I thought it was a joke. I short, Yumbo. Latino, he stepped it up last night. And you know what? I was proud of that brother because he's probably not going to become president. Maybe he becomes VP or something. But my point is that he didn't let others tell him you shouldn't do it. You know, and guess what? If you know him, he's a real good person. You know, he hasn't gotten where he's gotten by being a mean SOB political person. You know, so those are just my political examples. Again, the activists like you all, Yaya, Christina, all of our friends that are watching this. I see Zoe from Orlando. I mean, she moved from New York. It was a leap of faith. New life. She was running a big organization, all kind of connections, but she wanted to do more, help our community in Florida. So we got a lot of examples out there.
No, and the one thing I would just want to end with this segment with mental health is that when somebody confides in you about the battles they're facing, try to be as least judgmental as you can. We all of us handle things differently. All of us. We handle death. We all handle grief, sadness, anger, wrath differently. Somebody, you know, having parents divorced could be just as traumatic in their life as, you know, having parents that are, you know, abusive in a domestic violence relationship, right? Because there are levels of abuse and there's levels of violence that people face. But just because one didn't go through something harder than the other, like, who are we to say that? Who are we to say that a situation that a person went through?
Let me tell you something. Nobody wins that argument.
Nobody.
Who got it worse?
It's like the oppression Olympics. It's like, so when somebody comes to you and they're like, oh, my great aunt died and I'm suffering. And it's like, just listen and be charismatic and have a little bit of sense of integrity.
Can I tell you a story? I'm going to call myself out on that.
Okay.
Because I'll be straight up. I think I'm a decent human being. But I'll tell you what. It took me a long time to be empathetic to people that lost their pets. Because when I was a little kid, my parents had a big old white dog, and we lived in the hood, and the top of the steps, the dog was jealous of me because I was the new baby. So the dog pushed me down the steps. I used to have this mark under my eye till I was about a teenager. And I remember I was traumatized. I was a little baby rolling down these steps because of this big dog. So I was never feeling animals. They're smelly. I don't like picking up other entities' poops. It's just animals and pets are not my thing. And then when people, you know, they would treat it like, wow, I'm like, you cool? Like, oh, my dog died.
Wait until you get a pet. Listen,
I had a pet that had to give it up for adoption because my kids.
It was the hardest thing.
Oh, I know. But it took me a minute to figure that out. Is my point.
No, I honestly, I'm going to call myself out, Ray. I'm not going to let you put yourself out like that. I did not care about animals ever. Like, ever. Like, I was like, oh, like, it's going to be fine. Humans first, animals let her by. I was literally that cold-blooded. So I was like 25.
No, the minorities, we get into the political thing. White people care more about dogs than Puerto Ricans.
No, and then I have a Puerto Rican mom, so, you know, you couldn't have pets because she's Captain Clorox.
Oh, my God.
You can't have a pet. My mom still has plastic on all her stuff. Trust me.
No.
But, like, now, since I've been with my husband and, like, we have a dog, like... That's
your baby.
That's my baby.
I know. Well, my wife loves pets and animals.
Take pictures with Augustus.
She's bugging me
Yesterday was his birthday. We got him a dog bed. Like, he's my heart and soul. And let me tell you something. Yeah. God forbid something happens to that dog.
I know.
God forbid.
See? But I had to learn that. I ain't going to lie. I had to learn to be empathetic on that situation. Let's take a real quick break. There's some announcements, and we do have to wrap up the show pretty soon.
That's right. So we're taking a break, and you're listening to 106.5 FM in Philly, PhillyCAM.org, Found in Translation radio show, and you're listening to Ray's Latinos Talk Show.
I wanted to give a shout out before we go to the next segment. What do you have? I think it's on. WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia. You got to check out. If you're in the Philly area, you can also listen to it on the TuneIn app. Just type in WPPM. You can listen to programming all over the country. We have our friends from the Black Tribbles coming on after us. Dos Puntos, a lot of good programs here. And, of course, support the podcast. We're still under the moniker on the podcast world as Ray's Latino Talk Podcast, but we are changing the branding, and you'll be seeing the Found in Translation logo on that feed very soon. In these final minutes, we have a couple quick announcements I want to make sure that we got into. First of all, there is another showing of the Break the Silence documentary from the Love Shouldn't Hurt campaign. Our great friend Christina,
which I went last time.
Yes.
So
talk to us.
So yes, I went. Shout out to Christina for doing a great event. It's heavy. It's very heavy. So I always give people disclaimers before they go to events because you have to be careful with your mental state. It is a trigger warning for sure for anybody who has been through domestic violence, have witnessed it, etc. So be sure you go with a clear, concise mind. Yeah. But it was very eye-opening, very awakening. All three women in the in the film, kudos to them, including Christina, for being so transparent, talking about the trauma and the ugly in love that they had to endure as women, and how they got out of the violence and the relationships. I mean, it's very profound. It's very prolific. I think that you should go. Love Shouldn't Hurt is an excellent an excellent organization through Christina, who's really helping women in our culture understand them, like the patriarchy, like aggressive machismo, the shenanigans is not cool.
So you gotta go if you're anywhere near Philadelphia this Sunday, June 30th, 3:00 at the Espita Building, the old Cardinal Doherty campus, 6301 North 2nd Street, in the Olney section of Philadelphia. Again, this Sunday, June 30th, 3:00. The documentary starts. A great friend, and you'll need to give Christina a donation when you show up there. Espita, 6301 North 2nd Street, 3:00, Sunday, June 30th. Our great friend Luz Colon is going to be the MC of this thing.
She was great.
And Luz does her thing. She's a great friend of ours.
Shout out to Luz and congratulations for being recognized through Philly's baseball handle, the SSP Productions, if I'm not mistaken, for a Breakthrough Latina through the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. So kudos, Luz.
Luz does her thing.
I see you in these.
We need to get. Luz is one of the people that has not been on the show yet. We need to connect. Well, there's a lot of our folks, but and the last thing is this show's going to air before the upcoming Hispanic Fiesta at Penn's Landing. Adonis Benegas, the executive director of Concili, wanted to make sure we shouted this out. Saturday, July 6th, and Sunday, July 7th. So next weekend, July 4th weekend, down at Penn's Landing, 101 South Columbus Boulevard. We're going to have a 2 to 8 p.m. Saturday and Sunday. The 38th annual. We'll be up in here in a minute. So I was 6 when the first one started, so I predated the festival. I didn't predate the parade, but I predated the festival. But actually, I wonder if I was at the first festival. Anyway, the 80 Salcedo, Lalo Rodriguez, Kim Vieja, other entertainment will be there.
Wait, Lalo Rodriguez is going to be there?
Lalo is going to be there. So you may have to roll in there on Sunday, July 7th at the Great Plaza, Penn's Landing. Everyone knows where the Penn's Landing is. So I wanted to shout out Adonis Benegas. You know Adonis? To kind of bring this full circle, Adonis Benegas is one of our young up-and-coming leaders in our community, runs this organization, wonderful people. Adonis is a Honduran immigrant to this country. And think about our Honduran friends, thinking about our homies in Miami, like Luis Cerros. My brother Michael's best 2 friends in life are Honduran brothers from New York. They're brothers. And just thinking about the Hondurans, the El Salvadorans, I mean, we got peoples whose family are being locked up by this government right now. Let's put that into it. That's how personal that we need. These are our peoples. Like, how many Hondurans we got in our lives? El Salvadorans, Guatemalans. Like, this is our family here. So I just wanted to note that Adonis Benegas, a Honduran immigrant, look how that young man is contributing to our country. And this is just one small example of that. So definitely check out the Hispanic Fiesta taking place at Penn's Landing July 4th weekend. We need to wrap this up, my friends. Any final thoughts? Let's start with the quiet one here. Samantha, final thoughts.
Do it, Samantha. Do it.
Final shout-outs.
Shout out to Samantha for jumping in the chair and crushing it. Producer. Yeah, okay.
Filling in. But I agree with everything you guys said. I agree. It's just crazy to think. But again, hitting it, making it personal makes it hit home. Making it personal makes it real. It humanizes things. It gives people a voice. It makes it that much realer. So
I want to thank my fearless co-hosts. I apologize for the technical difficulties with the trains and the transportation me getting here, but y'all did a fantastic job. And I just want to thank the Fountain Translation family. For y'all hardcore people that like to stay up late, or my West Coast people, I'll be on at 11 p.m. after the debates with my Dominican compadre, Elba Garcia. We're going to keep talking the political stuff. We had to take a half step back because this conversation was about leadership, but we have to take care of each other.
That's right.
And we do have to get out of here. So, Yaya, wrap us up.
Call your politics. Be kind to one another, of course, and be sure to take care of your minds.